Hi, thank you very much for joining us today at session 13 of DS's Digital Sciences Showcase event. In this session, we're going to be talking about a subject which is very close to my heart, that of scientific authenticity and context, particularly nowadays where we've had so much discussion about fake news, about conspiracies, where everyone in the world is talking about the progress of science in terms of addressing COVID-19, but underlying all of that, these questions, what's going on with the science? Who do we trust? Who do we believe? So today we've got a session lined up for you featuring three people who are going to be talking, bringing in some perspectives on this and similar areas. Our first speaker is going to be Lucy Goodchild. Lucy is based in the Netherlands. She's a science writer. The second speaker is going to be Professor Thaiane Oliveira from Brazil. And finally, I'll be welcoming Emily Chenette from PLOS, who is an editor-in-chief. So the format today is that we're going to hear each one of our speakers talking for about 10 minutes, give or take 10 minutes, and I'm going to be monitoring your questions as they come in. And after they've all had their chance to speak, we're going to be coming back for about 15 minutes, thereabouts, of questions and answering, a discussion session afterwards. So thank you again very much for coming along to our session. Do stop by the chat window and say hi to us, and we'll look forward to hearing what your questions are. But first, Lucy, are you ready?
I believe I am.
Wonderful.
I hope everyone can hear me all right.
It's great to hear you. Great to see you as well.
Great to see you as well.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited to be part of this panel. This is my passion. It's been my career, so it's a topic that I get really excited about. So I'm going to limit myself to 10 minutes, but dong the bell if I'm going on too much. I'll be talking sort of from a practical point of view. I have a few slides just to sort of show you a bit the process of how science gets from the lab, or from the research into the media, into our brains as consumers. I've been doing this for over a decade. I have an undergraduate degree in genetics and microbiology, and I started off in science PR. So I worked at a research charity at Imperial College London, was the university I was at for a while. And so I've worked on all sorts of different topics, and really my main, let me see if I can share my screen. My main role has been to promote and engage with the public around research that's being published. So hopefully you can see this. We'll get there eventually. So some of my, I have probably more than 500, less than 1,000 press releases in my time. And they've been all over the place. Trying to find these headlines from Imperial is quite funny. They don't look so great, these websites from back in the day. But basically, I had a huge amount of front page research. And there's a lot that goes wrong in this process, I think. So I wanted to talk through the actual process of how it gets from one place to another. Let me close this so I can see you again. So you start with an academic paper. Usually, once it's published or when it's going to be published, the scientists will work with the press office at their institution or at the funding body or at the journal and produce a press release. Now, this obviously doesn't happen. No, I know, I've turned them off. I figured you didn't need slides. Hopefully you can still see me. I figured you didn't need slides for this bit. So you basically work with somebody in press to get your story turned into a press release, to translate it into something that other people understand. And then you get it out to the press. And that's something that a press office can do because they have, quite practically, the contact details of journalists. Then you'll go through a series of interviews, answering questions, engaging with the press about this, about your research. And then you get the coverage, of course, which is great. And you can bask in the glory and really enjoy engaging with the public about it. And then perhaps it hits social media. And And then there's a process of response and dialogue and talking to people about the research and, talking to other scientists about it. And this is what happens in the public, which usually happens in parallel to whatever the researcher is doing at scientific conferences and that sort of thing. This process has been the same for many years. And one of the things that's part of it is the embargo system. So if a paper is being published in a journal on a certain date, the news can be embargoed, what we call embargoed. So there'll literally be a date put on the story so that all journalists release the story at the same time. And this is why you'll see possibly in a huge science story, all the papers publishing the same story at the same time. I'm going to go through an example that I saw very recently. And the reason I saw this study, the first place I saw it was on TikTok, which is my new favorite place to be. So the story is about mask wearing and COVID. It had to be COVID, didn't it? Because this is the big example. But I'm going to show you this example to explain some of the things that can go wrong. So this is a study that came out recently. Hopefully you can see my slides now. Very recently, a month ago, low-cost measurement of face mask efficacy for filtering expelled droplets during speech. So the actual point of the paper really was about low-cost measurement. So it was about a device that the researchers can use to measure which face masks are best at stopping droplets from spreading out. This was obviously huge. And Duke University, where the lead researchers were, did a piece. This is from Phys.org, which is one of the places that a lot of press releases go to explain the study and really put it in context for the public. And so they were very open and honest about proof of concept study, about what it's about. It's about this simple low-cost technique, and they were very clear about it all. One of the things that can go wrong in this process is that this is a very small one-way communication. They have put the study in context, but it's very difficult to control that message down the line. So when it goes out into the public, it's then owned by the public. And there's little you can do to control that message. What we used to do with big topics, with possibly contentious, controversial research, or something that we knew would be difficult to understand or possibly misunderstood generally in the media, we would take a little bit more control of the message. So we would do an embargoed press release and possibly something like a press briefing, where you gather some of the major researchers in one, journalists in one place, where you can directly answer their questions before they have to write about the study. So you can make sure that everyone's literally on the same page about what's happening. Again, they were very clear, this is just a demonstration. So they had some results, proof of concept results about which masks work the best. And what happened was everybody loved it. So 12,000 metric attention score is huge, picked up by nearly 500 news outlets. It was massive. And it started off good. If you look here at the bottom, this was the first piece that I just showed you. Inexpensive, accessible device. It's about the device. Very quickly, if you scan upwards, that's the direction of time, you'll see that people picked up on one particular point in this paper, which was that these gaiters, they're called, these kind of face coverings, are actually what Best Life here is saying is worse than no mask at all. Not true. But so the press sort of took on this message, and what happens is, as one outlet takes the story from another outlet, the story evolves and starts to change, and you see the message changing. It moves further and further away from what you have in the beginning. And then you get something like this. Some commonly used masks don't offer much protection. Okay, that is something they showed, but it's very unclear about all the limitations. And then suddenly that's happening in different languages. And so you've got this message that spreads around the world very, very quickly. And actually, in this case, the researcher went back and said, no, that's not what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. It's very important to engage like that. One of the big problems in the process is that there isn't any mechanism for this in general. And sometimes there is no response. If there is it enough? Then the next stage of the coverage is that it becomes part of the conversation. It becomes a mention in another story. It becomes part of public knowledge, of media knowledge. And at that point, it's very difficult to do anything about what that piece of information is that's been taken on. So I think there are a few things. I'm going to come back over here now. I think there are a few things that that we can do to improve the situation. The first is planning. Plan outreach before you publish. Plan everything you're going to say, who you're going to say it to, and how you're going to monitor things and control the message. More active communication on the part of scientists. And I know it's really awful to always put this on scientists' shoulders, but you can do a fantastic job of engaging people because this is what you know, this is what you're excellent, and this is what you're passionate about. But this means skill development, including communication in scientific training. I think that's really important. The next thing is to include diversity in the channels being used, because people aren't all reading CNN. You know, I saw this on TikTok, and I do read these news channels. And then invest in the response and the dialogue. And this is where altmetric really helps, I think, because you can track the coverage, you can see where things are being mentioned, and you can go in there and become part of the conversation. You know, own this information and really help guide the discussion. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what I wanted to say. And I'd love to hear from everybody. If you've got experience working with the media and sharing your research, I'd love to hear what your experience has been. Thanks.
No, thank you so much, Lucy. That was a really engaging subject, and actually, I wish I'd heard it a few weeks ago when that paper was coming out, because it was causing so much controversy on social channels about what it was saying and really what it wasn't saying. And you know, I'd sort of cottoned that it was a very low end, so I was sort of out there going, hang on, this isn't what this person's going to say. But I think what you just said there really nailed the difficulty that we have in controlling that message. That's really interesting. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the questions coming up. Don't forget, if you have any questions for Lucy or any of the other speakers, pop them in the chat box there, and I'll be coming back to them after the three speakers have spoken. So our next presenter is my friend, Professor Thaiane Oliveira, all the way from just outside Rio. Lucky thing, heading into spring. It must be spring there now. Is that right? You're on mute, by the way.
Oh, that's working as it's spring here, but it's always summer in Brazil.
It's winter here.
Yeah. I know. Thank you so much for this invitation to be here in this so important event and sharing this panel about this topic, because it's also my passion. We talk about it with a lot of passion when we talk about the relevance to share the information, the scientific information. And it's an honor and a pleasure to, sharing this panel with such a fantastic woman and with my friend Mike. What I am going to talk today, it's about trust, truth, and mediatization of scientific controversies. Just a minute. Trying to understand the challenge for democratization of knowledge in times of epistemic disbelief. In this time of health crisis, it has been highlighted and urgent deficient to be debated in the scientific ecosystem, which is the closed system of scientific publication. The open science has been present as a way to combating the disease, but also to debunk the misinformation. The open science have been comprehended as a way to combat disinformation under the rise of skepticism and the disbelief of the population about science. And this rise of skepticism is related to this moment that we are facing nowadays, not only in Brazil, but in many countries, that we are calling, as I said, we as a scientist, I am a researcher from the Federal Fluminense University in Brazil, we are calling as epistemic crisis. What it means, the epistemic crisis, is a moment in which the institutions which has the function to promote, produce, or disseminated information and knowledge, is facing a moment, a crucial moment when the people do not believe in the information that they produce. These epistemic crises give voices to conspiracy movement in which information is a field of disputes over the production of the narrative. But it's not just a cultural movement, a cultural movement. It's also a political project in some countries, in which the leaderships, the political leaderships, increase this sentiment to the disbelief in this epistemic institution as science and media. Because without confidence, the chances of collective mobilization diminish, and without political participation by citizens, the democracy becomes more fragile. Based on this contest in which I present, in this contest, we can see the improvement of the discourse to incentive the scientists. The scientists has been asked to publish their results and their data in different repositories, openly also in open journals, and is part of the movement of open science. And it's possible to identify two main approaches about the open science. One of these approaches is more related to productivism, in which acceleration, cooperation, visibility, reproducibility, and the transparencies are common value. And it's also easy to observe another approach more related to democratization of knowledge, participation, access, and social justice. In this time of health crisis, these approaches related to productivism, especially in these discourses about acceleration, has been more in evidence in these days, especially through the incentivation to the scientists to publish their results and their data in preprint repositories. And when we are talking about the ways that the scientists communicated and published their results, it's important to understand that this research, it's not limited to the scientific community, but it's spread in other spheres as social media and also in news media. And we have been observing this process of mediatization of scientific controversies. And what is controversies for science? Controversies for science is inherent of the produce of scientific knowledge. It's essential for the scientific practice based on a democratic system of evaluation. Looking at Dimension, the data that we collected from Dimension, we can observe that 20% of all the publication, all the outputs about COVID is published in preprint repositories. So it's really important to understand how do preprints circulated, especially in Brazil, in which we face this moment of epistemic crisis. How does the media frame this preprint? Do they contribute to clarify and tackling the information and misinformation about COVID, or do they reinforce other frameworks that provoke more disputes around the scientific information? This research I did with some colleagues, Ronaldo Araújo, Patrícia Petri from Universidade Federal de Alagoas, and Roberta Siqueira from Fiocruz. The first step we did is collect data from Dimension, especially the data from My Media Archive, the most important preprint repositories in these days, nowadays on pandemic times. And after that, we extracted the DOIs and imported to Altmetric platforms to understand how the Brazilian media mention these preprints. The first thing that we find is that although all this importance of the movement of open science to publish, the incentive to publish, to scientists to publish their results, their researches in open spaces, in Brazilian media, 15% of this mention is restricted just to subscriber through paywall system. And after that, we saw how these journalists frame the preprint, frame the information about science based on the preprint published, classifying it in 4 categories. The first one, the journalist explained that the research is published in a preprint platform, and I also explain the review process. The second category, they only mention the preprint without any explanation of the review process. The third category, we observed a confusion between the platform, the preprint platform, preprint repositories, and journal. So it's very common to observe the journalist mentioning that the preprint, this study was published in a journal media archive, and 29% has no mention about the preprint, the review process, just publish information like these studies is about COVID, is about hydroxychloroquine, and so on. After that, we started to see not just the format of the ways that the journalists mention the information, the scientific information, but also the content of this medium, this news. And we saw a movement from the media, also politicization, the science, also bringing up political topics to talk about scientific information. So it's common to find phrases as the study was discredited, the researcher is questioned, that there is no uncertainty, there are controversies, and so on. And after that, we tried to see how these media, these news, circulated in social media, also in Twitter and in Facebook. And we saw that the users reflect disbelief about epistemic institutions because they perceive the conflict of interest, especially concerning the pharmaceutical industry and geopolitical and political disputes about the advances of treatment against COVID, when there is this phenomenon of mediatization of science controversies and politicization of science. And it's very and it's a concern for us because when the people lost their confidence in media or in science or in the epistemic institutions, they started to believe only in their individual belief system and those who confirm them. And we know how it has been used as a political strategy to convince the population about some political projects around the world. So my conclusion is, although the freedom of press is fundamental for democracy, the mediatization of science controversies does not help to strengthen the public awareness. Keeping the controversies or keeping the debate alive has been transformed in negation of science. More than accelerated science in these productivist values, we need to talk about the responsibility of the journalist and give visibility of scientific controversies, especially related to the politicization of science, and the urgency for us scientists to think about our role in society, to think about in more democratic science. No matter how important is the issue of access, acceleration, we need to think about it, to think about the role of science and understand what the population is saying. And they say that they want to be heard, they want to be part of these research centers and institutions, because they think that these spaces, these scientific spaces, are privileged and are limited only for the elite. They don't feel part of it. They feel a part of it. So it's necessary to invest in open science model that emphasize this democratization of knowledge, social justice, participation, especially in this time when our democracy is threatened under the banner of an imminent war to combat disinformation. Here is my contact, and I had a special participation of my dogs. I'm not sure if you if you heard, but it's part of the home office. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Thaiane. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but my cat came and visited us during that presentation. She was marching up and down. Usually she likes looking at herself on the screen, but this time my camera's a little bit further up, so she couldn't visit us. Thank you very much for that. That's really great. We've had a really lively chat session going on in the conversation. Now I've now got 2 or 3 substantial questions to bring up for our final discussion session after our next speaker, Emily from PLOS, who is joining us from somewhere else in the UK, I believe.
Yeah, from Cambridge. That's right. Yep. I'm just going to share my screen. Is that working?
It's just coming up right now. Thank you so much, Emily. It's really good to see you.
Great. Yes, it's great to see you too. Thank you so much for the invitation to talk today.
My pleasure.
I'm the Deputy Editor-in-Chief at PLOS One, and I'm going to talk today about good science and how PLOS supports responsible communication of research. So the responsible communication of research means that we discuss studies that are fundamentally rigorous and sound, and this is what I'm calling good science. So I'm going to start off by talking about what we mean when we talk about good science. Then I'll discuss some of the benefits to authors and researchers, and then go over some of the roadblocks to implementing good science. And finally, I'll tell you a little bit about how PLOS supports good science. So what is good science? In our view, good science is selective for rigor, ethics, integrity, and credibility. And it fundamentally means that the research is open and accessible, it's reproducible, it's been conducted ethically, and that it contributes to the base of academic knowledge. So how does good science benefit authors and researchers? There have been some really interesting studies and reports about this that I'll go over briefly. There were 2 studies in PLOS One that have linked data availability to increased citation rates. One from this year found an association between articles that mention data available in a repository and up to a quarter higher citation impact on average. And then another from 2007 reported that publicly available data was significantly associated with a nearly 70% increase in citations independently of journal impact factor, the data publication, or the author country of origin. So we think that good science means increased impact. We also think that good science benefits authors by showing increased rigor. So another study in PLOS One that looked at psychology papers related the willingness to share research data to the strength of the evidence and the quality of reporting of statistical results. So the authors of this study concluded that the reluctance to share data was associated with weaker evidence and a higher prevalence of apparent errors in the reporting of stats results. So that's increased rigor as well. Another benefit to authors is increased trust. So a perspective article in Nature Human Behavior put forth a manifesto for reproducible science, arguing that without transparency, claims only achieve credibility based on trust in the confidence or authority of the originator. Finally, good science can lead to collaboration. A key finding from the 2019 report from Digital Science on the ascent of open access is that countries that have invested in open access have typically increased their level of international collaboration. But there are operational, technological, and ideological roadblocks on the path towards good science, and these include the need for a story, impact, or mechanism. So Lucy mentioned this really nicely in her talk about how press releases can spin out of control, right? It leads to overinterpretation of results that can to fit a hypothesis, and in the most extreme cases, it can lead to potentially a situation that fosters data manipulation or fraud. So another hurdle to this is lack of incentives. Some funders and institutes are arguing for open science practices to be a core feature of research evaluation, but change is slow, and hiring and tenure decisions are all too often made on outdated measures of success or productivity. Many researchers are also concerned that making data openly available may lead to scooping, and we've also heard concerns that data sharing could potentially lead to other groups finding unintentional errors in the presented analysis. So some researchers can consider this potential risk of post-publication correction or retraction to be a serious disincentive to sharing. Another barrier, lack of resources. Article processing charges can be beyond the reach of some potential authors, and even with the green OA route, uploading manuscripts and papers into repositories can take time that many authors may not have. And in that same vein, it takes time to upload raw data to a repository, and that's also without considering the time it takes to get the data into shape where it can be shared easily in the first place. And finally, we know that lack of information also serves as another disincentive. For example, authors may not know whether or not their funders require open access publication. Authors may not be aware of the intended journal's preprint or self-archiving policies. I've been speaking mostly about open access here, but the same kind of roadblocks also apply for ethical conduct of studies as well. So at PLOS, supporting open science is a core part of our mission, and that means supporting authors throughout the research lifecycle, from before the paper is submitted, through the review process, at publication, and then also after publication. So what does this look like in practice? Before submitting their work to PLOS, we encourage authors to deposit their manuscripts in a preprint server. We set up bidirectional links with the preprint server bioRxiv, and that just means that authors can submit from PLOS to bioRxiv or from bioRxiv to PLOS. Authors who post their work on medRxiv can submit their work directly to us as well. This bidirectional link with bioRxiv also provides an important filtering feature for bioRxiv. We only send manuscripts on to posting to bioRxiv that meet minimal standards. For example, they're the results of academic research. We also encourage pre-registration of research via the Register Reports article type on PLOS Biology and PLOS One. And those who are unfamiliar, Register Report splits the research output into two contributions, the so-called Stage 1 protocol, which is the study that the authors propose to do, and then the Stage 2 report of the research project. So any Stage 1 protocol that is reviewed and accepted receives an automatic accept in principle decision for the Stage 2 study, provided, of course, that the work was completed as described in the original protocol. So that article type was launched on PLOS One in January of this year. We've seen 8 protocols published so far and many, many, many more in the pipeline. It's really, really exciting initiative. We've also developed guidelines and publication criteria that emphasize rigor. So for PLOS One, that's been baked into the journal from day one. But even more selective journals, such as PLOS Biology, are taking proactive steps now towards emphasizing rigor and the importance of the research question over the novelty or the perceived impact of the results. PLOS also supports comprehensive reporting criteria. We help develop minimal standard framework that establish minimal reporting expectations for materials, including data and code, design, analysis, and reporting. PLOS Bio participated in a trial along with 12 other journals for this checklist, the MDAR checklist, that aids authors in complying with journal policies. We've also participated in trials to gauge the effectiveness of other reporting standards. For example, the Icarus randomized control trial that looked at whether journal requester completion of the ARRIVE checklist for in vivo animal experiments improves compliance with the guidelines. The results suggested that requesting the checklist didn't improve compliance. And so at PLOS One, we've taken a more stringent approach to this by asking for specific parts of the ARRIVE checklist to be reported in the methods. And this was recommended by the Icarus trial. We've also introduced strong encouragement for authors to link to RRIDs, research resource identifiers, for all relevant resources, and also strongly encourage deposition of materials in repositories. So once authors submit their manuscript to us, we work with them and our board of academic editors and our reviewers to validate good science. So a team of PhD level staff editors with subject expertise read every single manuscript submission, including everything that's submitted to PLOS One, and determine if it meets our policies on research ethics, disclosure of conflicts of interest, data availability, and other key concerns. Potentially controversial or harmful papers. So for example, this is research on non-human primates or dual-use research of concern like bioweapons. These are subjected to additional scrutiny. It can involve escalating to an external group of experts or consulting in detail with a member of our board before the decision is made to send the manuscript out to external review. All PLOS journals also have a scooping protection policy. We encourage close seconds, replication studies, and negative results. And this supports the emphasis on the research question and the rigor rather than the kind of the sexiness of the results. We also support good science of publication too. So authors can opt into making their reviews and feedback from the editor publicly available as part of the published paper. Reviewers who've opted into disclosing their identities during the review process will be named in the reports as well, which helps them receive credit for their work. We then select papers to press release as well. So these aren't always the hot papers, the ones, so-called hot papers, I should say, but it can be controversial or unconventional findings where a press release can help frame the discussion around the topics. So press releasing a retrospective study can help avoid language that implies causality because the study design can't actually test causation. We think this is a really important tool to control so-called fake news and the overinterpretation and hyping of results. And finally, we occasionally commission perspective articles and formal comments to help add important context to papers that we publish. These are written by experts who may or may not have been involved in the review of the paper, and they're a nice independent platform for discussing the strengths and limitations of new research. Finally, PLOS is committed to good science after publication. We support post-publication commenting on all published articles. All comments must abide by our good commenting guidelines about using constructive language, disclosing potential conflicts of interest, and escalating all concerns about experimental data or misconduct to the journal staff, which are dealt with in a separate way. Journal staff then work with authors to ensure that comments that are left on the paper are responded to, so we have a nice dialogue between commenters and the authors. We provide article-level metrics on all papers that we publish, which report the number of page views, citations, shares, and saves, as well as any media coverage. And we are incredibly fortunate to have a dedicated publication ethics team who works together with journal staff to investigate any issues that arise in accordance with the COPE guidelines, the Committee on Publication Ethics Guides, and reach a resolution on any publication ethics cases. We place an emphasis on writing detailed and clear correction and retraction notices, and we ensure that the process of correcting and retracting literature is data-driven and transparent. So thank you again for the opportunity to share our perspectives on supporting responsible communication of research. I'm really looking forward to the discussion that's going to come next.
Well, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Looks like we've got about 10 minutes for a conversation. We've had so much debate on the right hand. I know that Lucy's been jumping in and answering some of the questions. I think that when we come to the end of your three presentations, I'm really struck by this idea that we are only part way through making this transition from having a very ivory tower, locked down, a private, if you like, a private environment where research is done and the results of research is communicated. And we're in the middle of transitioning to a more, as Thaiane would say, a more democratic view of research. But we're not there yet. And I think that it's because we're not there yet that we get to see this conflict, that we have this conflict, this because we don't all know what our roles are in this new system. You know, researchers and journalists and other communicators, we all have, and journals as well, and preprint servers, we all have a responsibility to communicate what it is that we're saying and how we're saying it and what it means and how to interpret it. Now, this is part of the way that we need to open it up, but we're not there yet, which I think is my takeaway from your presentation. So let's just jump in. And I know that several of you mentioned the preprint servers, and that has caused so much active debate in the chat room. I'm just going to pull out a few of the observations. So Christina Miski writes that it made her think about preprints that are revised through peer review, and that news articles don't acknowledge these changes, which could result in differences in how the study is framed, or whether if an article is withdrawn, but then the news article continues to circulate. Several people made that point, similar points, as well as Christina. Jaseda asks, so what about preprints? Does this help make it worse, or does it help or make it worse for the general public? Anthony Nadolo in Kenya made similar points. So perhaps let's start with Thaiane. We'll go Thaiane, Lucy, Emily, and hear what you have to say about preprints. And I'll while you're talking, I'm going to phrase the next question. So,
yeah, I think that's a really good point, because the thing is, yes, all the scientific system is changing. We need to think about it. We need to reorganize the way that we publish the results. We need more open spaces to publish our research. What I am trying to say here, it's the preprint service, it's not the problem. I think it's part of the movement of the transformation of science that we are facing nowadays. But there's a lot of challenge. We have a lot of challenge in a closed a published system. We have a lot of challenge with the open access system of the publishing system. So we have a challenge. We have to face it. We have to try to think about how to construct better ways to communicate it. And I think that when we part from the perspective, the democratic perspective of open science, and try to communicate the process of doing science with inside the news, inside the text, and explain for the population how science works, I think it's the better way to face this problem. I'm not sure if I could answer and contribute to the debate a little bit.
I completely agree. And actually, I think that is the problem. Science has built this fantastic system. Preprints are a great thing for science, but where it's lost in translation is where you go from the science to the public communication. We're getting really good at explaining science to the public. We're getting really good at explaining molecules and bacteria and physics, and that's going really well. What's not going so well, and where we're still very much in this ivory tower, is that this whole idea of the construction around science is totally inaccessible to most people. And I think that's what we forget. And it's not the job of the media to explain it to people, because the job of the media is to entertain people. This is something that Alok Jha always explains. Guardian writer, if you don't know him, check him out. He's fantastic. But the job of the media is to entertain, even the news media. And when a story gets big enough that it moves from the science pages to the front pages, it moves from the science department to the news department. And the news department is not populated by science writers. And so then you're in this situation where they don't care because it's not important. What they see is that a scientist said this thing, therefore I'm going to repeat it because that's the story. And I don't know what the solution is. Actually, I think this is a very long-term challenge we've got on our hands. And possibly the solution is teaching the kids who are now starting school how this works and bringing the whole process of science into education, bringing critical thinking into education, and starting to teach people from the ground up, because we now have a situation where it's very difficult to have these conversations with members of the public when they're being entertained rather than informed. Okay. So that's my thought.
We've got a couple of minutes for Emily to have a quick say about preprints, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to wind up. But the showcase carries on after this. Although I have to go to a French class, other people are going to be around. So Emily, closing
Sure.
thought.
Delighted to talk about preprints. So I think that the concept of a preprint, of getting your work out there before it's gone through peer review and has that, this journal certified seal of approval, is a really important one, because instead of having 2 to 4 potentially anonymous reviewers and an editor that you may or may not have a conflict with, depending on who's handling your paper, you have, literally anyone with an internet connection and the time and the expertise can come and read your paper and apply it or comment on it or critique it or suggest ways to extend it or use it as the basis of their own work. I think it's a really important tool for improving communication as well. But I also agree that we need to be clearer about what the limitations of these studies are. And for ones that are not peer-reviewed, making sure that's very, very clear, and that media mentions are very clear about those limitations, and putting, an emphasis on a healthy discussion of limitations of the study in the paper itself, instead of it being kind of scattered post-publication.
And on that, I have to say thank you very much, not only to our 3 speakers today and also for DS for hosting this, but also for the amazing conversation that we've had going on the right-hand side. I hope you've enjoyed this debate. I really want to come back to this in the near future. So perhaps we'll try and organize something where we can have a little bit more time to talk about it, because this was absolutely invigorating. Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks.